My name is Parker Taft. Welcome back to the PNM. Today's broadcast is going to be a bit of a book review. So if you're not interested in that sort of thing, you can tune out now. In the same idea as I talked about with philosophy on Monday's episode of The Street Philosopher, my first episode of what I hope to continue as a series, I talked about the different types of philosophy and how philosophers are spread throughout society. Well, today we're going to be talking about a philosopher from the Far East, which many people would not typically associate with philosophy. Many people think, long, white beard, sitting around drinking tea, debating the meaning of life. But no, the piece of work I'm talking about today is required reading at the United States Military Academy and on the reading list of the United States Marine Corps. In addition, many leaders, politicians, and businessmen have also read this book and found valuable lessons in it. That is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Now, many of you people may be asking, what does the art of war have to do with my everyday life or my personal development? And on the surface, not much. It talks about military strategy, logistics, etc. But if you look deeper at the underlying themes of the ideas, like there's a good moral lesson, which we'll go into detail later in the review, about taking the path of least resistance when trying to accomplish a tough goal. It's not always the easiest path, but sometimes the easiest path is the right path. So you have to balance it out with, what is the good path and what is the easy path. And if the good path is the easy path, then definitely take it. There's no need to stress yourself out more than necessary. Anyway, that was a tangent. So let's get started into the book review. So, Sun Tzu, The Art of War. This particular one I like. The translator was a gentleman by the name of, a James Trapp. It says here he took his degree in Chinese at the SOAS, University of London, specializing in Bronze Age art and archaeology and early Buddhist sculpture. He works at part-time coordinating China's school provisions at the British Museum and also as a consultant supporting the integration of Chinese studies into the UK school curriculum. Wow, quite the accomplishment. This book was also published in 2011, but I like how it starts out immediately by saying that the translation is highly variable. If you go out and look up Art of War, there's hundreds of books on it. Some are dissertations, some are self-development books, some are business books, and then there are some which try to stay as true to the source material as possible. Unless you go out and read start learning and then learn to read ancient 3rd century Chinese, you're not going to be able to read the original work. So, let's talk about a little bit about the original author, because I'm a bit of a history buff, as most of you should know by now. So, we'll go on a bit of a tangent there, so tangent alert. So, Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is actually the romanization of the name. Most commonly, Chinese scholars and historians now attribute it to a Sun Wu, which was a general in the kingdom of Wu, in the service of King Wu, I believe. Let me check. Yes, King Heilu of Wu, during the Spring and Autumn Annals period of ancient China from 770 to 476 BC. So that would take you probably from the time of roughly around Solomon's Temple to about 30 years before the Peloponnesian War. For any historians or history buffs out there who want to fact check me, I think that's the time period that we'd be talking about. So anyway, this book is believed to be written as a treatise to instruct future officers in the army, because, the general is not going to be around forever. Sun Tzu knew he was going to die eventually, and that he decided he was going to leave a book of his lessons to future officers in order to teach them in the proper way to wage war. And a lot of the lessons in there are basically how to wage war. But there's also some important life lessons in here, which I would like to go into in a moment. So as I said, it talks about war and strategy. It starts off first with how to plan a war, how to wage a war, the art of the strategic offense, how to deploy your army best, momentum, the substantial and the insubstantial, what's important, what isn't, maneuvers against the enemy, the 9 variables of a battle, on the march, what to do, the terrain that you may face, the 9 types of ground of which you'll fight on, attacking with fire, and using spies. Another good thing about this book is that on the bottom, there are explanations. I don't know if you can see it. There's explanations like right here of what's going on in the text, and particularly obscure, like sometimes the English translation doesn't turn out quite right and it seems a bit awkward when reading it, and there's explanations as to why that might happen, as well as different factual and historical comments throughout it, so I think that's good for providing context. But anyway, as I continue. So first it talks about planning. Well, obviously it's going to talk about, readying your army, raising forces, political and social intrigues. But there's also a few important things about here, like the emphasis on a moral compass. If your battle is not in accord, if your war is not in accord with the ruler's will, and in accord with the people's will, it's not going to work. Basically, the will of the people, the leader, and in Sun Tzu's case, he says the universe, if they're not all aligned, the war is going to go badly for you. Which I think is an important comment on morality. Too many people today, when facing challenges, they try to put someone's, either society's priorities or their own priorities first. And often, those priorities are clashing. I want this, but society wants this. So the need to reconcile those is vitally important for one's health and wellness of mind. He also goes into emphasis on correct organization, emphasizing the need for planning and timetables and effective scheduling. Also in the book, especially in the chapters I found the most informative, was the substantial and the insubstantial, as well as the 9 variables, momentum, and maneuvers against the enemy. Maneuvers against the enemy, because as I said, I'm a military history buff, so most likely you guys would not find that particularly interesting. But the substantial and the insubstantial, it talks about basically what is important to care about and what isn't. And I'll read a few pages from the passage just to emphasize my point. So, as he said, the substantial, and the insubstantial. Attack at points which the enemy must scramble to defend. Basically, attack at the weakest point, or the point at which no one suspects you're going to attack. He emphasizes by holding out temptation, he can make the enemy approach. By inflicting harm, he can hold them at a distance. Using these same principles, if the enemy are taking their ease, he can rouse them. If they are well provisioned, he can starve them. If they are encamped, he can move on them. Basically, he's talking about doing the opposite of what your opponent is doing. This is good if you want to start a business or for your own improvement. If you see a competitor or someone making a mistake, you can learn from those mistakes, and you can actually use those mistakes to your own advantage. In addition, let's see, there's a particular passage here I want. Let's see. Oh, another important thing is, this is especially in business, but that could also apply to your sports, sports or clubs. Never employ the same strategy twice. So if you come up with a brilliant idea, let's say football, because a lot of people play football. You come up with a brilliant strategy, and you play it. Wonderful. It wins the homecoming game, let's say. So, alright, you won the homecoming game, now you're going to, say, regionals. I'm not a sports guy, so I can't tell you, but we'll just hypothetically say there's a regionals. So if you use the same strategy, there's a greater likelihood that people will have heard about it, and that your opponents will develop a counter to it. And if you somehow win using that same strategy a second time, then you go to states, that likelihood increases. So it's important to always mix up your strategies. I know, particularly in sports, that there's a finite amount of variability in strategies based on, rules and regulations and the like. But it is important, if you're a team captain or something like that, to always vary your strategies, because basically you're playing mock war, whether it's, soccer, basketball, football. It's all basically based around the same principles as if you were fighting a battle. And then he says, none of the 5 elements remain dominant for long. None of the 4 seasons last indefinitely. The sun rises and sets, the moon wanes, it waxes and wanes. I find this a very poetic line, And I think it's vitally important for us to consider its deeper context. It means that, time always moves on. No matter what we do, time always marches on. And that to act, we must act in the here and the now. We can wait, but the chance we have today may not be the chance we have down the road. As he said, the seasons will continue to change, the moon will continue to move, and the sun will continue to move across the sky. The weather will not remain the same. Just like now. Coronavirus is a good example of this. We were plugging along at one of the greatest economic expansions in history. And then in the span of 3 months, everything was turned on its head. And now, especially if you're a high school or a college student watching this, your end of the year activities for seniors have been irrevocably canceled, postponed indefinitely, and your graduations have either gone virtual or been severely limited or altered. And it just goes to show you how things can change so rapidly, and that we must cherish and be cognizant of the time we spend and missed opportunities. We must seize the day, as they say. Carpe diem. Alright, so the other chapter I talked about was momentum, which is page 26 in this. If you buy a book similar to this, I can't guarantee what page it's on. I do highly recommend buying this particular book because it's quite interesting. Plus, if you look, it's nice ancient Chinese style binding. It's not actually ancient Chinese, obviously, but it's a nice ancient Chinese style binding, which I think is nice and fancy and looks very nice on my bookshelf. So, let me get back into this. And pardon me if this book review is pretty long or boring. This is my first book review, so I'm learning. So if you have any advice or things that you want me to include in my next book review, by all means, fire away. I can take it. So let's see. Ah yes, momentum, page 26. So, the principles of control for a large force are the same as for small ones. The essential factors, how they're divided up. Deploying a large army in battle is just like deploying a small one. It's a matter of formation and communication. Well, you can apply this to your clubs, sports teams, or even your own personal life. It goes to show you how, in organizing anything, communication is required. Communication skills are vitally, vitally important. No matter where in life you are, whether you're a student, a teacher, a professor, a lawyer, doctor, garbage man, communication is vital, no matter where you are or what level you are in an organization. So that is a great emphasis, and the book emphasizes that quite a lot. Mind you, again, it is in the military context, that communication between the various portions of your army, etc. He goes on to say, to make the force of your army's attack like a grindstone crushing an egg, you must master both the substantial and the insubstantial, which we talked about, and the different approaches you can use. There's the direct approach, which can also be correlated into communication. You can directly approach someone and ask them directly, which I personally think is the best way, because you're more likely to get an honest response. Then you have the oblique, which according to him is most likely to achieve victory. In the context of a military battle, it is most likely. As we all know, World War I, charging out of the trenches, getting mowed down by machine guns. Direct attacks didn't really work well. They had to, do sapper tunnels underneath the enemy lines, tanks, amphibious invasions. We won't mention Gallipoli. So, the oblique in war can be helpful, but sometimes the oblique in social and communicative interactions can lead to unnecessary drama, at least in my opinion. He then talks about the 4 seasons again, and the constant passage of time. And then he talks about precise timing. Now, in the world of personal development, precise timing, the best time is now. You'll see that across all platforms. That the best time to do it is now. But the precise timing of taking a particular action is sometimes good. Like, say, going into the stock market, for instance. The best time to start investing is now, definitely. But if you want to get the most bang for your buck, timing the market, say, at a downturn like it is right now, would be an important aspect. So you can see how, business leaders can take some information out of this and use it to their advantage. Same with negotiating. If you have a well-timed response in a negotiation, especially if it's a fact or a statistic, it can back up your argument and end up convincing your client, your teacher, your coach, something that you were arguing for but they weren't necessarily on board with until that particular comment. So you also have to be very careful when making those comments, because if you don't have your argument fully fleshed out and you make a comment at not the right time, or bring up a fact or statistic at not the right time, it can sometimes blow your whole argument out of the water. So that's where the art of reading people and understanding body language is important. There's quite a few good videos from the FBI about that on YouTube, so I advise you check them out, and I'll probably do a video on it sometime in the future. And he says, momentum is the tension, timing is the trigger. So once you build up momentum, like 30-day challenge, that's a good way to build up momentum. So the timing when you do it, like most people do it, start challenges during 30 challenges and during New Year's. Especially those, lose weight, lose 30 pounds in a month. Not realistic, but I advise you to go check out my goal setting video on that. So, and a lot of them fail because the timing is not necessarily right, and they don't build up the necessary momentum. Most people have to wait for epiphanies. That's their timing. Something really bad has happened in their life, or something really drastic, and they have to fix it. Or they realize their own faults and have to improve upon it. By watching this video, you're kind of having an epiphany or timing of your own, and if you're participating in the 30-day challenge, definitely. And each day you build up momentum towards achieving your particular goal, whether that's exercising, not eating desserts, for instance. We'll say not eating desserts, for instance. Each day you don't do it, you build up momentum. And if you cop out, you lose that momentum. Bad timing. But as the momentum grows, it gets easier and easier for you to continue because you start to get used to it. You start to build the habit. It takes about 30 days to make or break a habit. Just a little factoid in there for you. So yes. And he continues by saying that in battle, you can be surrounded by chaos, disordered, and a tumult and confusion. Your disposition of forces may seem formless, but in fact you remain invincible. Apparent confusion masks true organization. Seems a bit odd coming from a military commander. They're, as if you've seen the movies or experienced it yourself, they're very rigid, exact formations, but in reality, they train you to work as a team together, but also to work as an individual, independently. So it's important in your own personal development to be able to train yourself to get over the bumps in the road. As I mentioned with the timing and momentum, if you miss a day of exercise, or you eat a dessert, or binge a show that you said you weren't going to binge, it's alright, acknowledge it, pick yourself back up, and move on. We each have our faults and our weaknesses and our chaos, but if we build a system and we get enough momentum behind us, we can overcome them. So yeah, The Art of War. I particularly like this book. I think it is quite informative. It's not a specifically garnered towards personal development. It's more of a historical text, but I still think there's a lot of vital lessons that can be learned from it, from a person, even if you're not interested in military history or are in the military, or if you're not even a business person. I think you can learn a lot from this particular book. And I specifically recommend this particular translation by, what was his name again? James Trapp. It is very thorough and well written too, easily understood, and provides historical context. So yes, Sun Tzu's Art of War. Again, highly recommended. So, I once again thank you for joining me on this channel. I hope you all are doing splendidly in your 30-day challenges. Leave a comment below if you have a topic that you want me to cover, or otherwise need help on, and I'll try to get back to you on it. If you like this video, don't forget to click that like button, share and subscribe, and I will see you next time. This is the PNN Broadcast, signing off.